truthwithcoaching.com. I'm going to talk about 3 super critical things for your mixed faith marriage, especially a Mormon mixed faith marriage. Progression, perfectionism. These 3 things really come to a head, so to say, in a mixed faith marriage. We're going to talk about each of them just briefly. Change and progression are 2 ideas that we struggle with. And when I say we struggle with, what I mean is they tend to hold, like there's some dissonance, some cognitive dissonance that we have to really sit with when we look at these 2 ideas. Let me walk you through it. So for instance, a lot of times when we're faced with change, especially change in our marriage, we freeze. We don't like it. We more than don't like it. We fight it, right? We think that if change is happening in our marriage, that something has gone wrong, and that it can't be right and it can't be good. And let me put it another way. Our marriage should look like our parents' marriage. Our marriage should look like it did 10 years ago. These are all results of fighting change. Now, flip side of the coin, we also hold dear this idea of progression, right? This idea of improving, becoming better versions of ourselves. This can be a really difficult duality to hold. To hold the idea that we don't want our marriages to change when a faith transition comes into play, and this duality that we're constantly changing, because that's the very definition of progression. And knowing progression is important. The doctrines of the church is part of our eternal nature, but it can be so challenging when faced with change while also believing in the principle of progression. So I want to talk a little bit about how to really handle change with a little bit more grace. And really what I mean by that is how to embrace progression in ourselves, in our spouses, in a mixed faith marriage. A lot of times what happens is we say, well, it's progression if I like it, it's change if I don't, right? So progression is good, change is bad. If I like it, it can happen. If I don't like it, it shouldn't be happening. And frankly, that can be a little unfair to ourselves and to our spouses and to our marriage. And then we'll talk a little bit about perfectionism. So let me give you a few tips, frankly, on how to embrace change, which is really the same way of saying embracing progression. It's just like I say, a lot of times we like to call something progression if we like it and change if we don't. So 3 really simple things, because that's exactly what a faith transition is. And a mixed faith marriage, for us who have a faith transition that causes the mixed faith marriage, is it's change. It's progression, meaning our relationship is changing to a different level, a different phase. Okay, 3 quick tips. 1, it's helpful to recognize that change is normal. Right? Progression, change, whatever you want to call it, is normal. Now, I like to use the word change here because a lot of times if we don't like it, we like to think it's not normal. And that's just not true. Change is normal. No one ever stays the same. No marriage stays the same. Nobody stays, we don't want it to, otherwise babies would always wear diapers, and no thank you, right? No thank you. Change is normal. And a lot of times we just don't like a particular change, right? Or our spouse doesn't like it, however it may cut. And I want you to hear this. That doesn't make it wrong. It's still just change. It's still progression. We just have to sometimes own the fact that we don't like it, but it is normal. Okay, tip number 2, recognize we can handle change. We can handle it. We are humans. We have these bodies that are literally created and wired to handle emotion and to handle change. Our bodies are so resilient. You can handle change. You may not like it, but you can handle it. It's really, frankly, just part of the human experience. And like I said, our bodies are really strong. It takes a lot to throw them off their game. You can handle a mixed faith marriage. Stress isn't always fun, but you can handle it. And number 3, this one's, I think, the most important, is recognize you don't really see the full picture yet. You really don't. You don't know the full repercussions of your faith transition or your spouse's faith transition. You just don't know. Now, you may think you know. You may think you know. Others may tell you what those repercussions are, but you really don't know. You don't know what it'll look like in 5 years or 10 years. You don't even know what it'll look like in 5 months. You don't know if you'll like it or not. You don't. You think you do. I know. I am so the same way, but you don't know yet. We are so quick to judge what is bad and what is wrong and what is good without really knowing the full impact. And we do this to our mixed faith marriages. We do this to our spouses. We are afraid of what we don't know. This is very normal. And we're afraid that if we don't act now, or if we're not decisive now, we'll really regret it later when it's too late. And that really is just fear thinking. That's all that is. It is fear thinking and fear acting. You can always decide again later if you realize you really, really don't like it after you know the full repercussions. So those are my 3 tips. 1, recognize change is normal. Recognize you can handle change. And recognize you don't see the full picture yet. Okay, let's talk really briefly about perfectionism, because I think it's really tied in with these ideas of change and progression. So what happens a lot, even progression and our capabilities to grow and expand, is we sometimes get stuck, and I'm using that very intentionally, in perfectionism. So perfectionism is so hard. It's such a hard habit to break. It's really when we want to be perfect, or more importantly, when we think we should be perfect. And that's really hard. And what perfectionism usually leads to is we then use our imperfections as an excuse to beat ourselves up. We use our imperfections as a reason to self-loathe. Now, you may not think you're doing this, but if you are, this is a great example. This is me. At the end of the day, if I haven't accomplished certain things, I beat myself up. Meaning I say, I should have done that. I should have done more. I should have been better at this. That's perfectionism speaking. Instead of, at the end of the day, being able to look at what you did and be grateful, be proud, feel the accomplishment, instead of using it as an excuse to beat yourself up, thinking that will help you do better tomorrow, because it just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. So then when you look at your marriage, a lot of times what happens is when change happens, or progression, individual progression, however you want to say it, when there's a different reality now in the marriage, and we don't like that reality, we don't like what's happening, a lot of times perfectionism will come in and we'll start beating ourselves up for not having the right kind of marriage, right? For not having the kind of marriage we should be having, the kind of a marriage that our parents have, or that our bishop has, or whoever. And a lot of times what that does is you add change and then you put perfectionism on top of that, and it's miserable. You just beat yourself up over and over and over for, the fact that you have a mixed faith marriage. And I just want to gently, hold yourself there so gently instead of beating yourselves up. This is when you need to be gentle and loving to yourself and not harsh and mean. But a lot of times people with perfectionism and those tendencies, I am included in that, we use the difficulties in our marriage as a reason to beat ourselves up for why we're failing, for why our marriage isn't what it should be. That doesn't help us create a better marriage. It doesn't help us show up in a way where we can make changes that we want, or we can show up in a way that we want in our marriage. Now, if you're like, what is she talking about? We need to talk. You need to get on a call with me, because this is a common mistake people make. They think if they basically, chastise themselves enough, then they'll be good people. They'll be kind. Things will turn out for the better. And that's just not true. We need to learn to be gentle and love ourselves. We need to be able to accept change in ourselves and in our spouses in a gracious and loving way, for then our marriages to be beautiful and wonderful places to be and spend time. Some people really struggle with this. And if you're one of them, reach out to me. Let's talk. Go to brookeboothcoaching.com. Sign up for a free call. Just click on the button, work with me. We need to get on a phone where I go through a little mini exercise. We can look closely at your mixed faith marriage. See what's going on. See what you want to create, and maybe start to find some of the roadblocks that are stopping you from getting there. And I'm guessing resisting change and perfectionism might be some of those roadblocks. All right, wishing you the very best.